What's going on, it's Suk and I'm back with a brand new video on SuperDuprTech, and in today's video I'll be showing you the results that I got when running a number of different benchmarking tests on the brand new A17 Pro powered 2024 iPad mini. We are on the road to 10,000 subscribers, so if you are new around here then be sure to hit that subscribe button, clicking the bell to be notified when I upload any of my up and coming videos. But without any further ado, let's hit the titles. So as I mentioned, this brand new iPad mini has the A17 Pro chip inside, which means we should see very similar performance to what we've seen with last year's iPhone 15 Pro Max models. So in typical fashion, the first benchmarking application which I ran on this iPad mini was Geekbench 6. Now I started off by running the CPU test, and when running the CPU test I got a single core score of 2,863 along with a multi-core score of 7,020, which whilst on the single core side of things its performance is better than the iPad Air models, it certainly lacks when it comes to the multi-core. And when it comes to running the compute test through Geekbench 6 to see how well this iPad mini performs when running the metal test, I got a score of 25,425, which as we can see is some ways less than what we've seen with the iPad Air and the iPad Pro models. So when it comes to tasks that are a bit more graphically intense, you might not want to use the iPad mini, but as you'll see in my up and coming review, it's certainly no slouch when it comes to gaming. I then wanted to see how the A17 Pro within this iPad mini would perform when it comes to throwing a number of AI benchmarks its way. So I then ran the Geekbench AI test and started off by running the CPU test, in which I got a single precision score of 3,951, a half precision score of 6,805, which gave us a CPU quantized score of 5,574. I then ran a number of tests across the GPU and got a single precision score of 3,868, a half precision score of 4,010, along with a quantized score of 4,116. Where things certainly get a little interesting is when it comes to testing the neural engine's performance within the A17 Pro. So when testing this, I got a single precision score of 4,026, a half precision score of 24,517, along with a quantized score of 34,250, which is a massive increase over the 11,286 we see with the previous 2021 iPad mini. I then wanted to see how the A17 Pro would perform graphically, so I ran a number of different benchmarking tests from 3D Mark. Now I started off with the wildlife test, which as expected it maxed this out, with it also averaging 59.1 frames per second. And so naturally I then ran the wildlife stress test. Now when running the wildlife stress test, the best score that this iPad mini scored was a score of 9,642, whilst its lowest was 8,300. I also ran the wildlife extreme test, and when running this test across this iPad mini, it scored 3,127, with it also scoring an average frame rate of 18.7 frames per second. So you can clearly see that there is a performance difference between the iPad mini, the iPad Air, and of course the iPad Pro models. But nevertheless, I continued on with my testing to see how this iPad mini would perform when the wildlife extreme stress test was thrown its way. So when running this particular stress test on this iPad mini, the best score that it achieved was a score of 2,965, whilst its lowest score was 2,653. So once again, when comparing to those other iPad Air and Pro models, we can certainly see that there is a performance difference, but in comparison to the iPhone 15 Pro Max, we can clearly see that the iPad is holding its own. I also wanted to test the ray tracing capabilities of this iPad mini, so I ran the Solar Bay test. Now when running this test, it scored 5,242, with it also coming in with an average frame rate of 19.6. which interestingly enough is more than what I've seen with the 11-inch iPad Air. But it pales in comparison to the iPad Pro models, which come supporting the M4 chip, which is based on the newer A17 Pro chips. I also ran the solar-based stress test on this iPad mini. Now the best score that it achieved was a score of 5,116, whilst its lowest was a score of 4,468, which is still higher than what we've seen with the 11-inch iPad Air, but it still pales in comparison to those other iPad Air and Pro models. I then ran the Steel Nomad Lite test and got a score of 1,154 with an average frame rate of 8.5 frames per second. And when it comes to running the Steel Nomad Lite stress test, the best score that this iPad mini scored was 1,252, whilst the lowest score that it achieved was 1,133. So I wanted to further test the graphical capabilities of the A17 Pro chip in this iPad mini. So I then ran GFX Bench Metal. Now GFX Bench runs a number of different tests which vary from both higher and lower levels of intensity, which are both ran on and off screen. Now in the interest of saving some time, I have calculated the average for each category. So the average that I got for the higher intensive tasks was an average frame rate of 115.64 frames per second, whereas the average that I got for the lower was an average frame rate of 194.89 frames per second. I also ran the Antutu benchmark on this iPad mini and got a score of 1,478,918, which isn't too bad in comparison to the iPad Air models, but of course it's not in contention with the top spot held by the M4 powered iPad Pro. Once again from Antutu, I ran their storage speed test, and when running this test I got sequential write speeds of 803.3 megabytes per second, along with sequential read speeds of 247.1 megabytes per second. And when it comes to testing the RAM performance, I got random read speeds of 141.9 megabytes per second and random write speeds of 27.6 megabytes per second, which is still quite slower than the iPad Air and the iPad Pro models. So we can certainly see that there is a difference in the performance of the RAM in the iPad mini compared to the Air and the Pro. I also ran the Antutu HTML5 browser benchmark, and with this the iPad mini scored 79,604, which is pretty much in line with what we see with the iPad Air, but of course it pales in comparison to what we see with the M4 powered iPad Pros. I wanted to further test the A17 Pro's web-based capabilities in this iPad mini, so I ran both versions of Speedometer. Now when running Speedometer 2.0, the iPad mini scored 498, and when it comes to running Speedometer 3.0, it scored 29.3. I also performed a Wi-Fi speed test and got download speeds of 509 megabits per second and Wi-Fi upload speeds of 100 megabits per second. I also ran the Jazz Disk benchmark and got sequential read speeds of 1,542.17 megabytes per second, along with sequential write speeds of 869.27 megabytes per second. And when testing the RAM, I also got read speeds of 30.29 megabytes per second. One area in which you'll certainly notice a difference between the iPad Air, the Pro and the Mini is when it comes to the write speeds of the storage, with the iPad Mini coming in with speeds almost half that in comparison to the Air and the Pro models. So I wanted to further test the 5-core GPU of the A17 Pro chip found in this iPad Mini. So I ran a number of different GPU tests from Basemark GPU. Now I started off with the official native test, which runs the benchmark at a resolution of 2360 by 1640. Now when running this test I got a score of 15,066, which gives us an average frame rate of 150.67. I also ran the Basemark GPU test at a resolution of 1920 by 1080 and got a score of 25,468, which also gives us an average frame rate of 254.69 frames per second. I also ran the test at a 4K UHD resolution of 3840 by 2160 and got a score of 6548 with an average frame rate of 65.49 frames per second. I also ran the Affinity Photo benchmark and got a combined multi-CPU score of 420 along with a combined multi-GPU score of 6742. So here's a first that you may not be aware of. With the brand new iPad mini, you are indeed able to run Final Cut Pro, which is something that you've not been able to do as of late, as it's something that has been limited to other iPads that come with the M series of chips, namely the iPad Air and the iPad Pro models. So this is certainly a plus. But anyway, I was intrigued to see how the performance of this iPad mini would stack up to the iPad Air and the iPad Pro. So it took 1 minute and 31 seconds to export Full HD video footage on this iPad mini compared to 56 seconds on the iPad Air and around the 42-41 second mark on the M4 powered iPad Pros. I also exported 4K video footage with this iPad mini and it took 3 minutes and 33 seconds to export, which is certainly slower than the 2 minutes and 53 seconds it took with the iPad Air and the 2 minutes and 33 seconds it took to export using the M4 in the iPad Pros. I also used Adobe Lightroom to render 100 raw GH5 images using this iPad mini and it took 2 minutes and 12 seconds to complete this, which is in stark comparison to the 1 minute 34 seconds observed with the iPad Air and the 1 minute and 6 seconds we've seen with that iPad Pro, of course with the M4 chip. So we can clearly see that there is some power differences which is to be expected between the iPad mini, the iPad Air and of course the much more performant iPad Pro. I also wanted to see if there was any performance differences exporting video footage through iMovie. Now when exporting the same video file through the iPad mini, the iPad Air and the iPad Pro, the iPad mini in fact was middle of the pack, with the iPad Air coming in taking 3 minutes and 42 seconds to export, the iPad mini completing it in 3 minutes and 26 seconds, and the iPad Pro with its M4 chip taking 3 minutes and 14 seconds. So that'll be it for today's video. Of course, if you've enjoyed this video, then be sure to smack that like button. And if you'd like to join us on the road to 10,000 subscribers, then be sure to subscribe, smacking that bell to be notified when I upload any of my up and coming videos. If you've got any questions with anything you've seen in today's video, be sure to drop them down below in the comment section, or alternatively you can hit me up on my social media, Instagram and X. I'll leave them linked down below in this video's description. Once again, thank you very much for watching and I'll see you next time. Take care and have a good one.